Fountainhead Forum 9. I'm talking to Ali Bautista, who talks about her leaving Jehovah's Witness and how that impacted her attitude toward the great big bad virus of 2020 and the stuff around it. How are you today, Ali?
I am well, thank you. How are you?
Okay, so tell me how this got started. You were obviously born into being a Jehovah's Witness, and so what happened from there?
Like how I left Jehovah's Witnesses or the COVID stuff?
How you grew up and how you grew up and then how you left.
Sure. So I'm 43 years old. I was born in 1979. My mom was a super, as we would say, zealous Jehovah's Witness, went door knocking at least 90 hours a month, which is all volunteer, not paid. And she raised my brother and I, he's 5 years younger than I, as Jehovah's Witnesses. And it just affects your entire view of reality. I don't have them available right now, but I grew up, Jehovah's Witnesses are known for having all of these books that they feel interpret the Bible correctly, that they are the one true religion, and they go knocking on everybody's door to quote unquote save people. And so I was trained, and they call themselves publishers, which is interesting. They don't call themselves Christians. They call themselves publishers. So we would, I would go door knocking multiple times a week with these Watchtower and Awake magazines, which are published by the Watchtower, which is the headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses in New York State, thinking that I was responsible for saving everybody else. 5 years old, thinking like, if I don't do this, God is going to kill me at Armageddon. And they have all these illustrations. The Jehovah's Witnesses go to meetings 3 times, well, at the time, 3 times a week. Now they only go twice a week. But so just constant indoctrination. And you're also indoctrinating yourself when you're studying for these meetings. And when you're going knocking on people's doors, it's just constantly indoctrinating yourself. Of course, we didn't have that language. We didn't think we were doing that to ourselves. But my whole worldview was that God was going to come and destroy everybody who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. And it was my job to save as many people as I could until this Armageddon event happened. And I believed that as reality until around 2015. When a couple of my friends from my congregation suddenly stopped attending meetings. And so we had always been taught, like, when people go spiritually weak, I'm going to use a lot of like loaded language that if you don't know what something means, just ask. But so they stopped attending meetings. So I reached out and sent them a text message like, hey, we miss you. Is there anything we can do to help you? Come back to the meetings. And one of the guys said, no, I'm never coming back to the Kingdom Hall. And he left a list of reasons, like 7 reasons why he was not coming back to the Kingdom Hall. And one of the things, and this is going to sound really weird to a normal person, but one of the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses is that the UN, the United Nations, is the wild beast of Revelation. It mentioned in the book of Revelation in the Bible. In other words, it's something disgusting to God. And I had been taught my whole life to not think politically, to not participate in the political system, that the things like the UN were horrible. And so when I found out that the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses had been an NGO, a non-governmental organization with the United Nations for 10 years, from 1991 to 2000, I was blown away. And so that was the first crack that allowed me to Google my religion and look at ex-members on YouTube and things like that. And so once the scales came off my eyes, so to speak, and I saw that what I had been taught my whole life was not the truth, then I was just allowed to research everything as far as that religion. And so because I had been taught my whole life to unsolicitedly share my thoughts with people who didn't want to hear them, now I felt like a huge hypocrite. So I went to my local leadership and I'm like, do you know about this? And then they also have a terrible pedophile problem in that religion, because they take 2 scriptures and make them mean that unless there are 2 witnesses to a crime, whether it's child sex abuse or anything, to not go to the police. So they handle all of these things internally. So once I saw, sorry, I have a puppy. once I saw, once I realized that, I was like, I cannot participate in this organization. And basically because I didn't leave quietly, they made several announcements that I was, quote, an apostate, which is like the worst thing you can ever be if you're like, yeah. So I lost everybody. I lost all my friends that I'd ever had for, and it goes across states. So I've lived in New Jersey, New York, and Texas, and I'm stationed here in Wisconsin now. Like none of my friends from my Jehovah's Witness days talk to me. They consider me an agent of Satan. So basically I had to start my life over, starting around 2018. Yeah.
Is that part of what people fear, maybe, that what keeps them in is they're going to have to start their life over, so to speak?
Oh, absolutely. Like imagine, since there's such an insular community, they view anybody who's not one of them, they use language like worldly. And, you know, you and I would think, oh, that's like a compliment. Like, oh, this person's worldly. No, like when a Jehovah's Witness calls someone worldly, it means they're not godly. They're a heathen, a pagan, you know, just a bad person, definitely lost, so to speak. So to go from, like, for example, when I lived in New York City, we lived in a Hasidic Jewish community. Like these people also, like those are their only community, and we're social creatures. Like it's about survival. If you're cast out of the group, you feel like you're going to die. You have no one. It's social isolation, just like they did with lockdowns. But so a lot of people stay. They have terms like, because there's a pretty big now ex-Jehovah's Witness community online, on YouTube, on Reddit. And so they have these terms like PMO, physically in, mentally out. So in other words, people who still go to meetings knowing that it's a joke, but because they have parents who are in, their husband or wife might still be in, children who are in, they just can't walk away because they'll lose their entire family. So yeah, it's a huge reason. It's a prison without physical bars.
Yeah, and and that can be a problem, you know, when people don't feel like they have anywhere to go. I mean, I don't know. Do they all have all their jobs and stuff come through Jehovah's Witnesses, or do Jehovah's Witnesses go and have jobs in the real world, or do they all have their own sub economy, their own, you know, small economy?
They do have jobs in the real world. So another thing Jehovah's Witnesses strongly discourage. It's not like an outright command, but it's in a lot of their literature, is they don't do higher education. So I didn't go to college, even though I had a full scholarship. They do menial work. A lot of them have like cleaning businesses, house cleaning, stuff like that. And that's another reason why some don't leave, is because they'll lose their job. But they do work in the world, but they're mentally constantly thinking, like, whether it's their employer, their boss, whoever, like this person is worldly. So they're mentally separate, even though they're still participating in the general economy.
So it's probably safe to say that a lot of them don't ever really become that rich, though. So, or even
definitely not. Those polls that they do, I forget the name of the company who does it, but Jehovah's Witnesses of all the world religions are the least educated and have the lowest incomes of all worldwide religions. Unlike the Mormons, who do encourage higher education, Jehovah's Witnesses are the exact opposite.
Yeah.
They call it like Satan's institution. And there's one, they have this leadership. It's called the governing body. There's 8 of them. I refer to it as like the Octopope. They're in Warwick, New York. They were in Brooklyn, New York for the longest time, but there was one of them. His name is Anthony Morris, and he gave this big talk about the more prestigious the institution of learning, the more satanic it is. I mean, just like this language, and imagine being like a 15-year-old who totally just gulps it down and believes it, thinking, because I remember I really wanted to go to college, and And people, including my own mother, she's like, well, if you go to university, you're going to fall out of the truth. They call their religion the truth. And so just hearing all these, you know, it was scary. So ultimately I didn't want to fall out of the truth and join Satan's team. So I didn't go to school.
Yeah, and there is, and you do hear stories. Hey, my kid went to college; he completely changed. It's not that unusual. Yeah. So.
Oh, there's definitely indoctrination going on in the school systems. I think it's worse now more than ever, because I considered going to school. I can't even say like going back to school, but actually going to college after I left the Jehovah's Witness, because I mean, I'm a waitress. Let's face it. Like it's a good job. I have a good gig, but it doesn't fulfill me completely mentally. So I was like, oh, and I wanted to be a nurse. And now I'm like, I wouldn't even know where to go to school, because it's just, that's.
Yeah, well, I hope that works out for you. And of course, I assume we didn't get asked for their opinion on having dogs. I hope they're okay with having dogs, but you never know.
He's a free thinker.
Yeah, they're not always free thinkers. Sometimes they just kind of follow your orders and go along. So
not this one.
Yeah, but so anyway, they. So this is so we see how it protects itself. Yeah, it's interesting and obviously they. So obviously you don't really. Do they have their own grade schools and high schools, or do you go to regular grade schools and high schools? Or
I went to regular school. Homeschooling back in the day, like in the 80s and 90s when I grew up, homeschooling was super popular. Thankfully, my parents let me go to public school, but Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate any holidays. So when all the kids were exchanging Valentines or doing a Christmas party or Halloween, which is super evil, all of that stuff, I would go sit out in the hallway or go down to the library. I wasn't allowed to sing any type of patriotic or holiday music. So like for the choir concert, I would just stand there when they would sing a Christmas carol in my head thinking that I was better than, because it's all about the mind. Like just there's a scripture, because I still consider myself a person of faith and I do enjoy the Bible. And there's a scripture that says like, give me inculcate in a man, a boy until he's 5 and I'll show you the man. That's a paraphrase, but it's so true. Like get the kids. And so that's when I saw all of this like masking and all of this stuff with the children. It just really triggered me. Like COVID was hard for me to watch, because it was like reliving my childhood in the span of like 6 months, and it was all the traumatic stuff. So yeah, to answer your question, they do go to school, but they're so mentally separate. And you're not allowed to have worldly friends. All of my friends as a kid, I wasn't allowed to do play dates with anybody who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. And if I was talking to a quote unquote worldly kid or person, it was because I was trying to convert them. It was all about starting a quote unquote Bible study using their literature. So, yeah, you can physically be in the same space, but mentally totally separate.
Oh yeah, I bet that's a hit at parties. Yeah.
Would you like to study the Bible with me?
Yes,
but it wasn't even the Bible.
Yeah, so they end up having their own. Don't really have networks outside of, which of course also makes it harder to go out and find jobs as well. So you end up taking. Well, I certainly hope you can. And so you were officially out when? How long ago?
Well, I was announced as an apostate in 2018. And then finally in 2019, I went before a tribunal committee, which is all like closed door. You're not allowed to bring recording devices, but I did. And I have that on my YouTube channel. And that was in 2019.
Yeah, interesting. Because I met you at Landmark. How'd you get into Landmark while you were still in Jehovah?
Because I was so depressed, and so I was just trying everything to help with my depression. Because you're living with like major cognitive dissonance, isolation, and I knew that I just needed to like feel better and get better. And so I did Landmark education in an attempt to like basically self-help my depression.
Yeah. Yes, so that was one. So is there a lot of depression in among Jehovah's Witnesses, or
A lot. And I would say, to just make a generalization, that the percentage of Jehovah's Witnesses on antidepressants and anti-anxieties is much, much higher than the general population, and drinking.
but that of course would also be considered sins, I suppose, wouldn't they? Or drinking and
Oh, the over drinking, yeah, but yeah, you just like justify stuff. They don't do drugs like marijuana and stuff like that. That's like a big no-no. But alcohol, yeah.
yeah, I wasn't sure. In most religions, alcohol is a no-no too, but it's so widely available that it just seems to slip through the cracks. I mean, I don't know. I haven't, but that's very interesting.
I'm on day 5 of being sober. I would consider myself a functioning alcoholic, and I'm no longer ashamed of like admitting that and saying that. My drinking got so much worse when COVID started. I was doing pretty good with exercise and self-care, and then COVID happened, and that was part of the design. Like, get people locked up in their homes. All they can do is like watch TV and stay safe. And
yeah, yeah, that's what I wanted to move into, because you said you saw all of the same things with the COVID narrative coming down, and it sounds like you were just opposed to this thing overall. I mean, the gaslighting and the manipulation that happened ever since it appeared. I mean, I never bought into it either, although I have to admit, it was very hard not to, absorb some of it because it was so prevalent. But yes,
I bought into it definitely for the first 2 weeks. So it was interesting. Because I feel like the country shut down on March 15th, 2020. And the only reason why I remember that day is because it's the Ides of March. And I was traveling. I was in Atlanta visiting a friend, and just glued to the TV, which is exactly what they wanted all of us to be glued to, with their propaganda arm. And I just remember seeing these images from Italy of like old people dropping dead in the streets. And of course we saw those images of like people just dropping dead on the street in China, and then just being hauled away in a body bag. And it's so easy to manipulate people, especially with video. And so I was like, whoa, this is really, really serious. And so I remember one news anchor was saying like, either bug in or bug out. And I did not want to be stuck in Atlanta. So I left my friend's house early and came home. And because I had been traveling, my employer, I work at a restaurant, they were like, you need to stay home for 2 weeks until, because they were saying at the time, like 2 weeks was how long it took for the virus to run its course for you to like be out. So in those 2 weeks, it was actually a blessing in disguise. Of course, I was freaking out about money. But I spent those 2 weeks, I took it super seriously. I didn't even go to the grocery store because I had plenty of stuff in my house. And this dog is really biting my feet. I spent those 2 weeks researching hardcore, just like I had researched my religion, once I realized it wasn't the truth. So that's when I found out about doctors like Del Bigtree, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. I don't even remember all the names of these doctors now, but I just listened to like 12 hours a day, podcast. Like, what is a virus? How does a virus work? Does a mask protect you against the virus? Like, asking all these critical thinking questions that I had trained myself to ask about my religion, I then applied to this. And in those 2 weeks of my personal lockdown, I was like, no, like, yeah, there are vulnerable people, but this whole reaction that they're having to this is insane. And so I bought into it for like the first couple weeks, but then quickly after researching, it was like, no, this is a psyop. This is not what it seems.
What a novel concept. You had more time, and you took more time to engage in critical thinking and getting informed. Wow. Geez,
But at that time, these people had not been canceled yet. Then quickly after that, within a couple months, all those doctors whose podcasts and things that were readily and easily available on major platforms, which I consider public utilities. Everyone's like, oh, it's a private corporation. They can do whatever they want. They can, fact check and cancel whoever they want because this is private. It's not public utility. But when you're talking about information, again, I had mentioned to you, like one of the instrumental books in waking up from my religious cult indoctrination is a book written by a secular scholar. His name is Stephen Hassan, and it's called Combating Cult Mind Control. And so right away with the whole COVID thing, it was like the BITE model: behavior control, lockdown; information control, not allowing all these other doctors to speak on public platforms; thought control, just constantly being afraid of this virus. Oh my God, I have to wear a mask. I have to, social distance. That was the most insane thing. Yeah. The virus stops after like 6 feet, like crazy stuff. And then of course, emotional control. You saw how everybody was just going bonkers. The fear.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I've not read that book, but I probably ought to check it out. Have you read? I did. I did go back and read again. True Believer by Eric Hoffer. Have you read that book?
I have. Yeah, I read that back in the Landmark days, but it didn't click. Clearly, it didn't. I didn't apply it to other areas of my life. But that's a good book too.
It does bother me. I mean, there are some aspects, but I definitely do not think Landmark is a cult. I mean, it has a few aspects of it, but I think it's just I think it's really unfair when they try to say Landmark's a cult.
Yeah, because you can leave Landmark and they'll welcome you back, so they don't shun former members. They do allow people to be critical of them, but I do, I don't know. I think everything is a spectrum.
Yeah,
and I think they're like a super, super soft cult, and I did get some benefits from it. But ultimately, they're about making money. And I think when you have people who, like me, I don't even know if I should have done Landmark because I was there trying to cure my own depression. And that sort of stuff, you got to be really careful.
Yeah, you got to be careful. I think, one thing that also shows aspects to a cult is generally the cults leave the people worse off than when they found them.
And I wouldn't say I was worse off. I just lost quite a bit of money.
And a lot of people, it seems like they're better off, after they do something with Landmark. It's a tough call, really. I certainly, and one thing I'll always say about Landmark: if somebody at Landmark says, "I'll call you at 3:00," they call you at 3:00. That's certainly something I can appreciate. But anyway, so how do you get out of, how do you get a society out of this? I mean, that's the main question I've been asking, because we've learned that facts and logic have no impact whatsoever. So what do you do when facts and logic don't work?
You put the oxygen mask on yourself, so to speak. It's so hard to see your loved ones all around you just, drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. But at the end of the day, I think personal peace, I've learned in the beginning when COVID was going on, I was so angry because here I just left this religious cult and I was excited to connect with people in general. And I actually lost a few friendships because I wasn't participating in the COVID cult narrative. Like you said, facts don't even work with these people. And it's because they're drunk. They've been ingesting this media Kool-Aid and they're drunk and their brain isn't even able to, and I don't say this with judgment, I say this with compassion, but their prefrontal cortex isn't even able to engage because their reptilian brain is just so saturated with the fear that's being pumped out. And the only cure for that, so to speak, is rigorous critical thinking. But when someone is so paralyzed by fear, they're not able to engage in that. So all we can really do is lead by example and compassion. And in the beginning, I was just so like self-righteously indignant that sometimes I sacrificed some of that compassion. And so, for example, like how I need to daily remind myself to deal with people who are still Jehovah's Witnesses, soliciting their like garbage literature. My first reaction, because I get like triggered by that, is to like be angry. But then I have to remind myself, like, these people are victims of victims, just like I was. And all I can do is just live and enjoy my life in freedom and continue to think critically and seek out those who are also speaking truth with facts. And as far as everybody else, like, I can't control them. So it's been for me a process of really learning to just let go of that control of others, period.
But of course, considering some of the things that were going on, it was really hard not to, not to worry about what other people were thinking. I mean,
I personally, and this could just be like conspiracy theory, part of my brain talking, I feel like COVID was a test run for something much bigger that will come, whatever that is. And so I'm grateful for that practice, so that the next time I don't get so like caught up in the emotion, and for me specifically like anger. I don't want to be like that angry person just looking around and being like, how can you like believe this? How can you act this way? And I don't know if I'm like going off any type of like script that you were hoping we would follow, but ultimately now I don't think it's selfish to be concerned with self-preservation. And if like a whole group of people are going to just run off a cliff,
yeah,
they're going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I let them. I say, I'm not going to bust my butt to stop them from running off a cliff, but I think I also think that because I was a teenager in the '80s and saw the hysteria initially over AIDS, I think that somewhat inoculated me against this. Yeah. Obviously, the hysteria over AIDS was not nearly as bad as this was, but boy, I just remember thinking this looks exactly the same, And the hysteria over AIDS was to the point that the news media would say something like, the CDC just released the top 10 causes of death last year, and they'd say number 1 was heart disease, number 2 was cancer, and then they'd say, oh, and by the way, number 12 was AIDS. Mm-hmm. I'm like, so why are you mentioning, I don't, obviously this isn't exact, but it's like, why are you mentioning this when it's not as high as the other things? It's, it wasn't hard to figure out, even though I was still, pretty young, that they're trying to push this narrative about it and, just making and blowing this disease out to be more dangerous than it is. And obviously, there was a time when AIDS was a death sentence initially. They've got some treatments, but it's
and again, we have Fauci to thank for that. Like,
yeah,
this evil man has been ruining people's lives since the '80s.
And there are things, that have changed since then. I mean, people take more precautions, with blood transfusions and other things, and those things really haven't went away. And then there were people who, did get it through things like blood transfusions that happened. It was probably very rare, but it's but they certainly tried to make it look like it was more contagious than it was.
So yeah, now we've entered this society where people don't want to experience risk at all. Like, it's just so bizarre. Like, everything is risk. Everything. You get into your car, you drive to the grocery store, there's risk. But they, and I don't know even who they are, but that's how they're controlling us, with risk aversion and stay safe and all these little phrases.
Or think about how many lives would be saved if we just didn't, get into cars.
Right. Never leave your house.
Yeah,
just have Amazon ship everything to you.
Yeah, it's that's another thing too, and that is.
Oh, look at who got rich during COVID. Like, if you want to follow like the plan, then follow the money, like they always say.
Yeah.
Who are the people? Who are the corporations? The companies that got super filthy rich during COVID, and then there's everybody else.
Yeah, and that's something else that's slowly evolved to this whole hyper emphasis on safety culture. That's really occurred. And that's really been a very gradual process, but you can see how it's happened, I think, with, you know, I can remember, you know, when I went to grade school, they used to have I can see where the frames were where they used to have a swing set at the school, but then they got rid of the swing set because the swing set was dangerous. And then later, you know, I can remember the swimming pools where there was a high dive, and then later there wasn't a high dive, and you know, the high diving board, and just all of these things slowly went away. And it definitely did not happen overnight, but if you transformed from the life of a child in the 1950s to the life of a child in the 2010s, it would look so different. I would tell kids, watch an old sitcom like Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best or something like that, and see how kids played and lived, and you'll just see a completely different world. Because, you know, kids were you know, allowed to cross the street by themselves. They were, yeah.
Well, that's where you get into Agenda 2030 and the Economic Forum and this Great Reset. They just want us to be virtual consumers and non-participatory on the planet that they want for themselves. We'll just, you know, enjoy our goggles on our couches consuming.
I don't know what to say about that, because I think they probably, obviously it's very hard to predict the pushback. And I think there was enough pushback against all of this from a minority, but a minority that was large enough to make it very difficult for them. I don't know what they're going to do. You know, generally when you have something like this, you go back and retreat and just regroup and plan something for the future, but you don't know when and where it's going to happen, though. But I don't really know what they're going to do. And there are some things, though, that are now working against them also.
Well, COVID, thankfully, and this is where I'm just learning to look on the bright side of everything, woke up a lot of people who we were really comfortable. Like the economy was pretty good. Life was pretty good before COVID. And then that happened, but it woke people up too.
Yeah. You know, the 2010s were arguably the greatest decade the world has ever seen. And, you know, not just, and, you know, really, you know, and from what I've heard, it was just the progress worldwide was amazing. And one thing I realized with all this is the misery really does fall to the bottom. I mean, there was misery here, but I don't think Americans, you know how the misery got translated to places like Peru, which was the second foreign country I ever visited, and places like that. It just, you know, I mean, I know a lady who was born and raised in Africa, and she called the COVID policies a genocide because they're just creating, you know, worldwide hunger. And I know, I don't know what the statistics were, but I believe the child mortality rate was dropping 28 or 29 straight years until 2020. And then suddenly, you know, you had more dead kids. It's like, and there's no way.
They even had to kill the president of Tanzania because he was the one who COVID tested papaya and goat and like all these, and they came back positive. Oh, yeah. Well, they had to murder him.
Yeah. And, you know, and a lot of these places, the people just can't afford to shut down their economies. I mean, you know, nothing, you know, and you have these, you know, these people now who just think food just shows up at the grocery store. It's like, no, that doesn't happen. I don't know how long we're going to feel the impact of these policies. I'm afraid it's probably going to be something that's never really reversed. Yeah. So, and going, yeah, it's, I am glad to see that travel's finally gotten back to normal somewhat. But
ish, yeah.
I mean, I've went to some other, you know, I got to go to Europe this year, and that was nice again. And
oh, nice.
Was pretty much normal. Yeah, it wasn't really I don't know what's going to happen. You know, so do you have anything else on how to recruit people out of the cultish mentality that's here, or I mean, what can be done?
Well, thinking back to like landmark days, remember how they would say like everyone around you is a circle and you are now a triangle. And this is kind of culty. I feel like that, like there's a little culty, but ultimately when you see someone who has something that you want, whether it's vibrant health, financial freedom, like you want that. So you ask that person like,
Yeah.
hey, and so I just want to be like a poster child for now of like total freedom from fear. And so the biggest question, going back to like my Jehovah's Witness experience and how it correlates to this right now, is people always ask like, how can you wake up? How can you wake them up? And ultimately, I have learned the answer to that is you cannot. All you can do is plant seeds. And when that seed decides to sprout in that person, maybe it's a decade from now. But we can't wake these people up. All we can do is plant seeds and live our best life. And hopefully that seed will sprout in that person eventually, and they can experience freedom from tyrannical organizations and institutions.
Do you think that maybe people want to live under abusive institutions? Or
absolutely, because then you don't have to make decisions. Like it's so cozy. Like it's, of course it's abusive, but these narcissistic people and organizations. Have you done a lot of research into narcissism? I know it's like the buzzword.
No, but you also mentioned though there's a lot of drinking problems in Jehovah's Witnesses too, though. So, maybe it's really not so comfortable. I mean,
yeah, because you have to numb out ultimately that you're not living an authentic life, that you are making the decisions from, but making decisions is hard. And so when you have someone telling you exactly what to do, then you don't have to engage your brain in thinking and making decisions. So I do think there are plenty of people who just want to outsource that process to their doctor. And I'm not referring to like the doctor who like actually sits down and engages you. I'm talking about the doctor who just like writes you a prescription for a pill and tells you to follow the leader. Yeah. It was a very predictable, small way to live from when I was a Jehovah's Witness, because I didn't have to make decisions. I thought like this Armageddon war was going to just come in and save the day. Like, so like, this is a small example. Like I have braces right now because I thought Armageddon was going to come by now and God was going to give me new teeth. Like that just sounds so stupid, like coming out of my mouth right now. But I got to like procrastinate doing things like that because I didn't have to take personal responsibility. Yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder, because the psychology of wanting to live in, but of course it does give you that kind of community. You also mentioned there was various abuse of kids too among Jehovah's Witnesses. I think it's
abuse of children or abuse of children.
Abuse of children and like molestation and stuff like that.
They have a huge pedophile problem because they take two scriptures in the Bible that says unless there are two witnesses witnessing a crime, whatever that crime is, don't take your brother to court. Don't call the police. And so they handle all of this internally. This was one of the other huge things that woke me up. And I have to remind myself, like, we're only 2 years into COVID. So I feel like more and more people will be waking up. But back to the thing that woke me up from Jehovah's Witness in 2015, the country of Australia held a royal commission. They hold these royal commissions all the time where they look at all the major institutions and organizations in their country, whether it's a financial issue. So the issue in 2015 was protecting children against child sex abuse. And so they studied the Catholics, the Boy Scouts, like all of them. And of all the organizations in Australia, the one that had the worst record by far of handling child sex abuse was Jehovah's Witnesses. There were over 1,800 documented cases of child abuse among Jehovah's Witnesses from the 1950s to current in Australia. And guess how many were reported to police?
2.
0. They kept all of it internal. So once I learned that, there was no way I could return to that.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people are waking up to this whole Western medical model and reevaluating if this is something they want to participate in as far as health care goes. Now, don't get me wrong. If I break my arm or if I have like an acute trauma, I think we have a great medical system. But as far as like preventative health and holistic care, there are a lot of things that need to change.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean,
and part of the reason why there was such like a high rate of, there actually wasn't a high rate of death from COVID, but the images, the propaganda that we got on our TVs of like all these people dying. What was the common denominator with, I want to just throw this percentage out there. Like 90% of the people I saw who they were like, this, kindergarten teacher died, like so sad for the families. But what was the biggest thing that you saw in all the people who died?
They were well over 100 pounds overweight.
Exactly. And so why aren't we addressing that in this country? If we care about like our family's health, obesity is a huge epidemic.
This was hardly discussed. I don't know what to say. It's so, I just don't know where, and I don't know how. You very rarely hear, even before, you very rarely hear anybody talk about this. It's
because you're so mean if you say
and Americans,
as a person who needs to lose quite a bit of weight.
And Americans are just in such horrible health overall. It's not even close anymore. American life expectancy peaked in 2014, at least if you go by the CDC, and it's been going down. I mean, we have all this, wealth and all, and I always say that that's really the only way to measure the health of a society. I mean, your GDP doesn't, if people aren't living long, it's just, what does that say? It's, I don't expect American life expectancy to get any better anytime soon. I mean, I think we're probably being and unfortunately, America's had these times before where I think people were desperately looking for a solution someplace, and they went to the others, and the others didn't have it. It's I think that's going to happen again. I don't know. You also, it seems like to me, since you're not political, it seems, how do you recruit people, to try to get them to vote for your policies or stuff like that? I mean, that just seems like it's another cult dynamic, or as I often say, it's like trying to, rehabilitate a junkie, it's
right. Yeah. And when I go to the polls, basically, I guess I vote for the lesser of two evils, but even that just kind of leaves me feeling icky. And I just so wish there was a better way. We were talking about like how this whole two-party political system is a huge problem in this country, and having those conversations with people like, hey, why do we only have two choices? This is crazy.
Yeah. And we've gotten into a system where the two choices inevitably get worse because they
support the one central thing. They're just like two appendages of one monster.
But it's like, you went from having, two candidates where they might've been rated a 6 and a 5 out of 10. And now you're down to a case where they're a 3 and a 2. And it's like, okay, where have you gotten?
Right.
I don't have a lot of hope for the country. And I don't really see, there's never been a case of a system reforming itself when it's been in this kind of a mess. And
did you read what Putin said yesterday on RT?
No, I didn't. I don't really follow RT much.
Well, you're not allowed to because it's banned.
And of course, it might have been. How do you know these translations are accurate too? That's another question. But yeah,
what?
How do you know the translations are accurate? Because Putin doesn't speak English, as far as I know.
True. I guess I just choose to trust that they're not mistranslating him. I do have a friend who is Russian and speaks English, and she's never said anything like, oh, this was mistranslated. I think there's really good journalism with RT in general. So I do tend to like trust them. We have to get information from somewhere. I'm not going to just be this, you know, ostrich who doesn't realize that there is a world outside of me, but it takes discernment. Yeah, it's
Yes.
this like balancing act of constantly. It's like driving a car. You're doing multiple things at one time, and so you're discerning like, does this have the ring of truth? If it doesn't, why not? And then you like do a quick search, and we're all constantly doing that. But I think awareness is the first step of like considering the possibility that maybe something isn't being translated correctly, and if so, why are they trying to control a narrative? I don't personally think that, because it only still makes him look bad. Like the whole world is supposed to hate this person who's just trying to essentially govern his own country. And I'm not saying I'm pro Putin. I have nothing invested personally. That's a whole other like subject we could get into, the war in Ukraine. And again, that comes, yeah. What flag are we all supposed to have on our Facebook? I support the main thing right now. And it's just such a circus. But back to what I was saying, he said is the US has nothing left to offer the world. And then he basically went on to explain why the US has nothing left to offer the world. And that kind of goes along with what you were just saying.
There's nothing special about America anymore because America doesn't believe in anything.
Well, we make people fat. That's what we have to offer.
This is the one thing too, though, when you talk about, when you're, in the grips of a psychological cult narrative, take a look at the example of Nazi Germany. And the only thing that woke all these people up was just being completely humiliated. And, that was what happened. I mean, they all just got completely humiliated.
Right.
I mean, I'm talking about the average German who thought Hitler was God, which is what most of them did think,
But again, then you rewind and it's like, why did they think Hitler was God? Because look at what happened. And I'm not like a history pro by any means, but in generalization, what the other side did to Germany after World War I made the ground fertile for a Hitler to arise. So it's just this constant, it's David Icke who always talks about this reaction, cause reaction. And so we always just hyper focus on the reaction without looking at the cause. And ultimately, this is where all of us have responsibility.
I mean, there's certainly something there. There's a lot of nuance to that, but you can't,
of course.
But I don't just blame Hitler for what happened in Germany. I think the average German probably needs to take some, and certainly there were heroic Germans who opposed Hitler, and a lot of them got to this point. They said our only hope is to lose this war, and
that's kind of how I feel about the United States right now. Like I do love this country. I was never allowed to say something like that as a Jehovah's Witness, but this country does have a lot of, I don't even know if I should use present tense, did have a lot of freedoms, but that was a really good quote you just said. Our only chance of winning is to lose.
Yeah. I mean, and it seems like, getting humiliated in Afghanistan wasn't enough. Which of course was obviously, and I was opposed to that from day one. I mean, it's and I wonder, if the same thing's going to happen with Putin and getting, because he certainly went way beyond, just defending Russia here in my view. But the thing is now with social media, you have the ability. I mean, I have people all over the world, and usually I just ask them what's going on there. Something happens in Brazil, I'll contact a few of them and said, hey, what's going on in Brazil? And I always say too, go to local news sources. I mean, if there's you're in Wisconsin, if there's some big shooting that happens in Wisconsin somewhere, I'll look up maybe a newspaper in Milwaukee or something like that and see what they say about it, because they're going to know more about that than CNN does.
Right.
Because they know the area, they know something about the people, You're in Wisconsin too, so you were in Wisconsin during the trial of Mr. Rittenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
What was the take on all that up there? I mean, it's
it was very polar. Like,
yeah,
there were some who were like justice prevailed, and then there were others who were just completely devastated.
yes, and yes,
I mostly stayed quiet. I guess what I'm learning now, because I was so loud exiting my religious cult, and I was so loud in the beginning with COVID. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost too quiet now, but
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Do most Jehovah, you know, there's always that need. People always have that need to leave loudly. It's like, you know, when you break up with a partner, it's like, my partner is so bad, my partner is horrible. And yeah, you know, do most Jehovah's Witnesses leave loudly, or do they leave quietly? Or
I think it's kind of split 50-50, honestly. I think a lot of it has to do with how do people respond to betrayal. I mean, when you're lied to your whole life and you plan your whole life around this lie, you don't go to college, you don't have children, you don't, do dental work that you needed, stuff like that. Yeah, you're pissed. So and you see them continuing to hurt other people, and especially children. I can't stay quiet.
yeah, that's definitely something. It's you know, I do sometimes see, you know, when people have bad breakups, but often it doesn't work, you know, and it just ends up leading to people firing more shots, and it's not always productive. But so I don't know yet. But you know, the Rittenhouse trial is also a good example of it, because I mean, if you actually sit down and watch the films, it's pretty obvious who was in the right and who was in the wrong there if you just watch the videos. But you know, some people just don't want to.
So what was your opinion, if I may ask?
I definitely was definitely self-defense.
Okay, that's how I feel also.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, I mean,
I personally don't think he should have gone there. I understand why he did. Was it the wise course? No. Um, but then again, his neighborhood was on fire. Like,
yeah, that was his neighborhood, and that was, you know, I wonder too how things would be different if he hadn't done that, because you
but like at work, I wouldn't have said, or in other settings, I would not have like just shared what I just shared with you, because
oh yeah, never talk politics at work. Yeah,
no.
yeah, I don't know how. Yeah, that's another thing. You just don't.
And that's where discernment comes in, or at the very least, instead of answering the question right away, is say, well, how do you feel about it? And then listening. I'm learning to listen first rather than just spew out my 2 cents.
Yeah, it is a way to protect yourself too. Figuring out what people are going to say. I don't know why, because it seems like it's getting dangerous to express opinions now. But I think you have to go out and do it. I know I certainly lost friends when COVID started too, because I was just going out and talking about all the fear and hysteria that was.
Yeah. Well, and my favorite quote is, evil continues when good people do nothing. Like, you went right back to like Germany. How many deaths could have been prevented if the German neighbors had just said no, but
or if so, it's really hard to say. I certainly feel like because I've been politically involved for so long time, I often feel like it's just it seems like it's become an exercise in futility, that you're just dealing in some cases with people who don't want to be educated.
Takes a lot of energy to keep. It's a marathon, and it's easy to treat it like a sprint, and it isn't.
There is a lot of work that goes into political activism and stuff, and it's not very rewarding, and people get burned out, and I think it becomes, you know, and you know, sometimes, you know, you know, it's like you do all this work, working hard, and you don't even win a medal at the Olympics. You know, it's a.
That's why I love people like Ron Paul, Rand Paul, Dr. Campbell, who's out of the UK. Like these men and women, ever since like the COVID thing started, have just like daily, weekly, they just keep going. And I have a lot of respect for these people who just week after week keep going.
Yeah.
And so I feel like now my place is to support those people, because I know I'm not that person who can pick up the microphone, because I was involved in activism on my YouTube channel I was pretty active for a good year and a half after I left Jehovah's Witnesses. And then ultimately it just got really exhausting. And I think that's when the drinking really started. And so now I've taken a step back from activism, and I'm just really focused on self-care. Because that is a way to serve my community also. Like you can't take care of someone else if you're not strong yourself. So this is a time for all of us individually to be healthy, be strong. So when the next wave comes, it doesn't overcome us.
You're more prepared to deal with it. Yeah. What do you call your YouTube channel?
It was Allie's Big Toe. Now it's called Prodigal Allie.
Prodigal Allie. That's a Prodigal Allie. Like, yeah, you have Allie's Big Toe on your.
I know. I need to change the name. I'm so like technologically stupid, but I need to change the name. Prodigal Allie.
Is that ALI or ALY?
ALI.
Yeah. Yeah, Prodigal Alley. So that's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So
I've been prodigal in my life. I didn't realize this, like the definition of the word prodigal. I thought it meant like one who leaves and returns, but it actually means wasteful. And so just taking responsibility for my own wastefulness and sharing my journey, basically.
Yes, I have a friend who calls the political left prodigals. I think that's actually a pretty good word for them, because he doesn't like to call them liberals. So, yeah, it's certainly very interesting where we're going from all this. I mean, so basically, you don't really think there's any way to convert those who need to be converted. It's just kind of
all we can do is plant seeds. And just like a farmer doesn't go out in the field and just like sit there and be like, grow, like he plants the seeds and then he goes and does the next task. So I think the more we follow that example and just like be farmers and plant seeds and live our lives and enjoy our lives, and be personally responsible, I think that's the way I'm going to live.
Yeah. So that's good. So yeah. So, one thing I need to ask you, with the abuse problem and Jehovah's Witnesses, do the clergymen get married, or are they supposed to be single? Okay.
Yeah, they all get married.
So getting married doesn't prevent, because I hear a lot about it at the Catholic Church where they don't let the priests get married. So getting married probably doesn't make a difference with this, at least it sounds like. But
no, when you have that sort of illness, I don't even know what to call that. It's sick. But they're also trying to normalize that. What is the expression? MAPS, minor attracted persons. Like they're trying to normalize pedophilia. It's all grooming. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But
yeah, it seems like to me there's a lot of issues here. I don't know. It's almost. How do you create a world where adults and kids can interact where this doesn't happen? I don't know what to say anymore, because I don't think the solution.
That's why we live in this postmodernist society where there is no such thing as like truth. There is no line.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but I don't think the solution, for example, is just completely separate kids and adults either. That's not going to help. Yeah. It's. But that's what our safety culture would say. I mean, there's a lot of adults don't even want to do any work with kids anymore at all, because there's this fear that they're going to be accused of doing something, even though they didn't do anything.
I guess we all just have to wear body cams 24/7.
Yeah, that's definitely, I hope it doesn't get to that, but
No, of course not.
because I don't think that necessarily creates a free society either. But
Well, who do you ever listen to people? These are the people who like unfriended and blocked me during COVID. They're like, oh my God, she's like turned into like a crazy conspiracy theorist.
mm-hmm.
And I don't subscribe to everything he says by any means, but do you know who David Icke is?
Oh yes, I know who David Icke is. Yes.
Yeah. And the one quote that he said that that really resonates with me is like, look at where China is. That is where they want us to be, like social credit scores, all of this. And so COVID was their really great trial run to start instituting this behavior.
Yeah, and you know, and you know what, and you know, and this is where I'm very sympathetic to the Jehovah's Witnesses, because all of these destructive ideas, they are right. They do come out of the colleges. I mean, this all gets started there, where some college professor, and after COVID, you know, I'm probably at this point where I would trust somebody with a high school diploma more than I would trust somebody with a PhD from Harvard.
Because they haven't been indoctrinated.
Yeah, because I don't know what they're going to believe, and you know, it's and you know, I've heard for some people, you know, Harvard or Yale on a resume is a negative for them. They just don't want to deal with that, because I don't know what's going to happen. It's very, very interesting. Because schools themselves can be very much an indoctrination thing.
Oh, I saw it happen recently. This kid who I knew in high school went off to like a super liberal, hardcore liberal school for 4 years and came out the other end, like not knowing what sex they are and blah, 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 blah. Like, and like, I don't recognize this person anymore. It makes me sad, but it's their life.
Yeah, and you know, from some people, from what I've heard too, is if you go into, I know one guy said, you know, if you go to Cal Berkeley, said, you know, if you go there lefty, you come out more lefty, but if you go there on the right, you come out more right, because I think you just become more angry at the left. It's and it does seem like.
And ultimately, when you go like super far in both directions, like both extremes are bad. Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you go to door all that much as a Jehovah's Witness, or not?
Oh yeah, I hated it. Like there are a few Jehovah's, like my mom loved it, but ever since I was a baby, like getting hauled around in a stroller, and then once I was like walking and talking, I would ring the doorbell, and then once I could talk pretty well, I would give the magazine and say the cover and be like, "Would you be interested?" And oh yeah, I did all the door knocking.
Do you think that strategy works?
Well, the one thing it does is when Jehovah, like pre-internet, yes. And it still is working a little bit. I think it targets people who are vulnerable. Ultimately, I think everybody just wants to upgrade their life. And so if you knock on the door of someone who is in maybe like an abusive relationship, has no family, and this nicely dressed person knocks on your door offering to spend time with you at no charge, and they love bomb. That was another thing. Like, I didn't even realize that's what we were being trained to do. But you love bomb this person, and then you form a relationship. And then before you know it, you're just listening to this person without question. So I think it works a little bit now with the internet. It's so easy to go online and be like, listen to testimonies of people who've left. Whereas in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, you didn't have that ability. But yeah, they're definitely dwindling. They're going down in numbers, the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, I wonder how the internet's changed that too, because you get a lot of people who will come out with their testimonies, and it's so easy to put it out there, and now it's easier to search for that. I mean, because I have a Mormon friend who said the same thing. He said the knocking on doors doesn't work. He thinks it actually turns more people off than it converts. But who
you also
might find these people.
Oh, what I was going to say is who it does work for and why they still like say like, do it is because the people who are doing the door knocking, they're indoctrinating themselves. Like that keeps them isolated. It gives them
Oh,
a job
yes.
to do, keeps them engaged in their, so you're indoctrinating yourself, and they just want the members they have to not leave. So they're, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly been very interesting.
Interestingly enough, I don't think I would have, if I had not woken up from Jehovah's Witnesses when I did around 2015, 2016, I don't think I could have survived in that religion through COVID. Because I have like a very like naturopathic, holistic medical worldview from my grandma. Like I've always kind of had mistrust with
Yeah.
the system. And so interestingly enough, Jehovah's Witnesses like hardcore buy into, follow for whatever reasons. I don't know why, but super pro vaccine, super pro mask. Yeah. They stayed locked down longer than any church anywhere. They didn't go to their kingdom halls for 2 years. They only started like gathering at their kingdom halls mid this year. I want to say like June, and they only started knocking on doors again in September of this year.
I think that's what might be for a lot of people too with religion is like, my church didn't stand up against this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if some people are figuring that, but because I did hear, because I did hear, for example, with the conversation I had with the Mormon, I mean, he said the average Mormon said this was nonsense, but the people in the authorities among the Mormons were saying, shut down the churches.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this whole thing is probably going to be I don't see how religion is going to emerge better off. Christianity is going to emerge more stronger because of this. I think it's going to come out a lot weaker just because most of the Christian churches just caved.
Yeah, I think the institutions will come out weaker, but
yeah,
there's one of my favorite scriptures. It is Genesis 50:20, where it talks about like it was the story of Joseph and how he went through all these trials, but ultimately what was meant to be evil proved to be good. And so I think a lot of people are now reorganizing themselves in home churches, which I think is really good for relationships. So I know that's a whole other discussion. There was something else I was going to say about Jehovah's Witnesses and COVID, and now I completely forgot. Oh, you're not even allowed to be, their headquarters is called Bethel. It's in New York State. And I want to say there's like 3,000 Bethel members in their 3 big facilities there. You are not allowed to be a Bethel member unless you're completely vaccinated. Like, wow.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know what to say about that. Yeah. It's
yeah.
I think a lot of people.
I think there should be a choice, like to just say, you must do this. It's like, well, what if I'm allergic to aluminum? What if I like have severe allergies to some of the components in the vaccine, regardless of mRNA technology and what that all means? Like, what if my body can't handle that? Nope. You're just can't work here, whatever.
There's a lot of things like that going on. It's definitely not, it's definitely one of those interesting things that I think is going to, it'll be interesting to see how this works out. Cause there's one place I'm not able to go back to because of that. Unfortunately, and it's something that was always a really great thing for me to go. And it was it's also a community where people were really good to me. And that's what really, and that's sometimes just what, and I think that's what often keeps, people in a community is just, are the people, do they get treated well there? It's, it's well, this has all been very interesting. I don't know if you have anything else to say from all this.
Keep researching, keep planting seeds, and ultimately just put your oxygen mask on first before you try to like help everybody else off the plane.
Oh yes, definitely. It's what you got to do. You got to put on the oxygen mask first. So,
and what's also exciting is like, I think there are way more people, quote unquote, with us as in like pro-truth, pro-facts, pro critical thinking than I ever realized, because it's through having these one-on-one conversations with people that it's exciting. I have a personal business as well, and I have clients, and it's an intimate setting where then you can have these one-on-one dialogues with people, and the brand you put forward on your social media, where you're not really allowed to talk about these things in a public forum. People are excited. They're like, "Oh, I didn't know you felt this way about this," and I'm like, "Yeah," and I know like 20 other people who, yeah. So it's grassroots. It's behind closed doors, and I'm excited. I do feel optimistic. Like the institutions and like all the framework we see around us on the outside is crumbling, in my opinion. But underneath that, I think there's a lot more people who are pushing back.
Yeah, it seems like there are, at least there are enough. I think there are a lot of people who are indifferent. And the other problem too is it seems like people are pushing back, but they're pushing back in ways that end up serving the villains as much as they, I question whether, not some people are controlled opposition or not, and you end up supporting your controlled opposition and end up worse off. It's hard to say, but I do hope that maybe this was America's bottom and maybe we'll come back from it, but I don't know. And I don't know what's going to happen with this whole war thing. I did say, if Putin had invaded Ukraine exactly 2 years earlier, coronavirus would have disappeared from the media, but we didn't have that. So hopefully we'll end up, But yeah, so it was great talking to you, and certainly got certainly learned a lot from all this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you for your thoughtful questions.
Yes, I'm Chris Baker, and you can find my novel Escape from the Village on all the sites, and I'm at chrisbaker.net. So have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye.